Welcome to the Crawlcast. I'm your host, George Krawczak, and this is what happened in the wild card round of the NFL. And first off, I want to say this was a rough week for my predictions. Last year for the playoffs, I went, I believe, 12-1 because I got every single game correct except for I thought the Browns would have beaten the Texans in the wild card round last year, but that did not happen. And this year, I was 2-4 in predictions, so that's rough. So the first game was the Houston Texans versus the Los Angeles Chargers. The Texans' leading passer was C.J. Stroud, who threw for 282 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Joe Mixon, who had 106 yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Nico Collins, who had 122 yards and a touchdown. And for the Chargers, their leading passer was Justin Herbert, who threw for 242 yards, 1 touchdown, 4 interceptions. Their leading rusher was J.K. Dobbins, who had 26 rushing yards. And their receiving leader was Ladd McConkey, who had 197 yards and a touchdown. So this game, at the beginning, it looked like the Chargers were going to dominate, and then they just kind of fell off a little bit. So they got 3 turnovers and only got 3 points off of those 3 turnovers. The Chargers simply can't do that and expect to win. So at the beginning, they're up 3-0, or they're up 6-0, and it was just a bad game for both teams. C.J. Stroud did not look good really at all. Justin Herbert didn't look good. Just both these offenses struggled a lot. And then towards the end, the Texans got a pick 6 off of Justin Herbert, and then they got another interception that really returned to the goal line. Will Dissly dropped a couple of key passes, and just overall, this was just kind of a bad game for both teams. Neither of the team looked really well at all. And so this does give a lot of concern for the Texans come next week, but at least on positive, their defense does look good. So maybe if Stroud doesn't commit as many turnovers and maybe plays a little bit better, they can get on to the next round, but it's going to be very tough for the Texans. And then Chargers, here's the thing. Yes, they looked horrible in this playoff debut, but they're still kind of in a rebuild. Jim Harbaugh just started as their coach. They did make the playoffs, so that's a positive for them. But overall, they need some new receivers and new receiving weapons. Ladd McConkey can't basically be their only receiver on offense. And just overall, a disastrous game for the Texans. Or, I'm sorry, for the Chargers. Well, disastrous game for both teams, but it really just felt like neither of these teams deserved to win. The next game is the Baltimore Ravens versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Ravens won 28-14. The Ravens' leading passer was Lamar Jackson, who threw for 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Derrick Henry, who rushed for 186 yards and 2 touchdowns. And their leading receiver was Isaiah Likely, who had 53 receiving yards. And for the Steelers, their leading passer was Russell Wilson, who threw for 270 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Najee Harris, who had 17 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was George Pickens, who had 87 receiving yards and a touchdown. So in this game, just the Steelers felt like they gave up right off the bat. Their offense struggled for almost the entire game, and their defense, was just non-existent, it felt like. So this whole season, the Chargers have had a really good defense, and their offense has just been inconsistent. Whereas, again, the beginning of the game, it felt like a complete blowout. The Chargers' defense was terrible. The Steelers' defense was terrible. The Steelers' offense was terrible. And the Ravens were walking all over them. And then towards the end there, the Steelers got quite a few key stops on the Ravens, and their offense just couldn't capitalize. And so it kind of looked like a disaster for them. And I understand that people want to go after Mike Tomlin and stuff like that. And I do get it because your expectations are the Super Bowl and not just the playoffs. But at least he got you to the playoffs because, again, the floor of the Steelers is the playoffs. And that's a lot of teams' ceilings. So overall, you got to be happy with making the playoffs. But unfortunate you did lose to the Ravens. I don't know if Russell Wilson will be back. That's going to be unclear. Overall, it's been a rough game for the Steelers. And again, I just think the Ravens were just a better team, and they played like it. Again, it was just weird because the Steelers felt like they just had no fight. They didn't really try. It just especially on defense. When you looked at them, they're avoiding tackles, they weren't trying to get up and make plays, and just overall disaster for the Steelers. And the Ravens, yes, they stopped you quite a bit at the end, but overall, this is just as good as you want it. You won, you played well, and that's kind of the main thing. And you're probably going to get far into the playoffs. It's a tough matchup against Buffalo, but overall, the Ravens, you got to be extremely, extremely happy. The next game is the Buffalo Bills versus the Denver Broncos. The Bills won 31-7. The Bills' leading passer was Josh Allen, who threw for 272 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was James Cook, who had 120 yards and a touchdown, and their leading receiver was Curtis Samuel, who had 68 receiving yards and a touchdown. And for the Broncos, their leading passer was Bo Nix, who had 144 yards and a touchdown. Their leading rusher was Bo Nix, who had 43 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Courtland Sutton, who had 75 receiving yards. So this game kind of went how everyone expected it to go. Like, it was pretty shocking at the beginning, because right off the first drive, they had, the Broncos had a really good throw from Bo Nix, and they scored a touchdown. And everyone was like, "Oh, maybe they'll make it super close," because it was a really excellent play by Bo Nix. But no, right after that one good play, they didn't score the rest of the game. And Josh Allen, he just looked elite. He played amazing. He had an amazing touchdown throw to, I believe, Ty Johnson. And back of the end zone. It was a little controversial whether he caught it or not. I think he probably did. But just overall, this game kind of went exactly how you expected it to be. The Bills just overpowered and outmatched the Broncos. And that's kind of just all you have to say about that. The Bills were a better team by far, and the Broncos, you gotta be happy because you are still in a rebuild and you're still working on getting better. And after your first season with Bo Nix, he looks like he's going to be your star quarterback, and your defense is good. You just gotta build on the offense a little bit. And the Bills, this is Super Bowl or bust. And right now, it looks like you are definitely at least one of the favorites to make it to the Super Bowl. The next game is the Philadelphia Eagles versus the Green Bay Packers. The Eagles won 22-10. The Eagles' leading passer was Jalen Hurts, who had threw for 131 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Saquon Barkley, who had 119 rushing yards. And their leading receiver was Devonta Smith, who had 55 receiving yards. And for the Packers, their leading passer was Jordan Love, who threw for 212 yards and 3 interceptions. Their leading rusher was Josh Jacobs, who had 81 rushing yards and a touchdown. And their leading receiver was Jaden Reed, who had 46 receiving yards. So this game felt a lot like the Chargers-Texans game in the sense that this was a disaster for both teams. Like, right at the beginning, the Packers fumbled the kickoff return, and there was 2 kind of plays on there. So first off, there was a talk about a helmet-to-helmet hit. That one I think is at least a little bit debatable because yes, their helmets did make contact, but Keyshawn Dixon did lower his helmet a little bit, and that's why they made contact. So I think that was probably a penalty, but that's at least debatable. The one thing that shocked me that I think isn't debatable is that Keyshawn Nixon clearly recovered his own fumble. He had the ball, he was down, and then after he was down, they popped it out again. And so I think that kind of really screwed the Packers with the refs essentially giving the Eagles, it felt like a touchdown there. And then overall, the Packers and Eagles both just played bad. The Eagles' offense couldn't really do anything or get anything going. Saquon Barkley wasn't that great until right at the end. He kind of blew off a couple of big runs, but overall wasn't good. And then Jordan Love, he just played bad. He was off. He was missing receivers, and just overall, that yes, there was bad plays. Like for example, at the end, there was effectively a Hail Mary pass, and there should have been pass interference in the end zone. The refs didn't call it. Yes, the refereeing in this game was horrible. But overall, both teams just played horrible. It felt like neither of these teams wanted to win, and neither of these teams are that good. To focus a little bit on the Packers here, it's like Jordan Love. It is one of those things where he did get injured in last game, but I don't know what's up with him. Maybe he isn't the guy. Like maybe he just got lucky and had an amazing hot streak to end the last season, and then all of a sudden, just like I said, it was a fluky hot streak, and he just isn't that good. But who knows? Or he could have been injured from last game. And this is what I hate about Matt LaFleur's kind of strategy is that So, usually in the final game, if it means nothing, you either play your starters and try to build momentum for the playoffs, or you bench your starters and make sure you're healthy for the playoffs. Well, Matt LaFleur, what he does is he plays the starters for a half and then plays the backups for a half. So you kind of get neither, where you're probably going to lose the game because your backups are playing for a half, so you're not building momentum, and you are risking injuries with the starters for that half. And in that half, Christian Watson tore his ACL and Jordan Love injured his elbow. And so I just think it was just a stupid game plan by Matt LaFleur. And it ended up costing them because let's just say the Packers won this game. They're out their left guard and Allen Jenkins are down to their second string and third string, basically swapping places. Their starting center is injured. Their top three wide receivers are injured. And with Jair Alexander not playing, their top corner is injured. So at this point, they're kind of a shell of their team at that point. And so even if they won this game, they kind of would look like nothing probably to the next round. And so overall, it was a bad game by the Packers, but at least with some optimism, you're still kind of in the rebuilding phase because I think last year was a little bit of a fluke in the sense that Jordan Love just had one of the amazing best second half seasons in NFL history. And no one expected him to play like that. No one expected the Packers to play like that. And so that was just kind of fluky a little bit, changing the expectations to Super Bowl now. And so they're still kind of in a rebuild. They definitely need to get better at receiver. And like their defense wasn't really the problem because they did stop the Eagles. But honestly, it felt like more of the Eagles playing bad as opposed to the Packers playing well. Just because like the Packers really had no pass rush. Their corners did step up and play well, but overall, I think this was kind of a disastrous of a game between both teams because on one hand, if you look at the Packers, you're like, so the Packers are basically down 10 almost the whole game with them missing a field goal and the refs giving the Eagles a touchdown. They're almost down 10 the whole game, and uh, I was like, how are the Packers only down 10? And it's also how are the Eagles somehow up 10? Just neither of these teams look good at all, and it does give cause for concern for the Eagles going forward. And with the Packers, who knows? You're still rebuilding. And again, a little bit of optimism, but you still have to worry about the Lions for the future. So it's going to be tough. The next game is the Washington Commanders versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Commanders won 23-20. The Commanders' leading passer was Jaden Daniels, who threw for 268 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Jaden Daniels, who had 36 rushing yards, and their leading receiver is Terry McLaurin, who had 89 receiving yards and a touchdown. And for the Buccaneers, their leading passer was Baker Mayfield, who threw for 185 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher was Bucky Irving, who rushed for 77 yards, and their leading receiver was Mike Evans, who had 92 receiving yards and a touchdown. So in this game, the Buccaneers were up for most of the game, and it kind of felt like the Buccaneers had this game in hand and probably should have won. So they had a big goal line stop against the Commanders. And then all of a sudden, on like an end around jet sweep, the Buccaneers fumbled the ball, and that was really the game-changing play. Baker Mayfield played really well. Honestly, both these teams played really well, and this was kind of the only good game of the weekend where it felt like you had two good teams. And again, because the first game, the Chargers, Texans, neither team played well, and the Ravens, Steelers, only the Ravens played well, and the Packers, Eagles, neither team played well. Both teams played well in here, and then coming to the Rams, Vikings, it felt like the Rams did not play well, and the Vikings did not play well, and the Rams did. So overall, I think both these teams looked really good. The Commanders, you gotta give them a lot of credit. Jaden Daniels looked really good. They did have no rushing game, which was a problem. And then the Buccaneers, I think their offense played well enough to win. And I think the Buccaneers probably should have won this game. But overall, it gives you a lot of optimism. I don't think the Commanders can beat the Lions. It's going to be a very tough matchup. But overall, both these teams did good, and you got to give both teams a lot of credit for playing so well. And with the Buccaneers, at least you're in an easy division, so you can easily make it back to the playoffs. The final game of the week was the Los Angeles Rams versus the Minnesota Vikings. The Rams won 27-9. The Rams' leading passer is Matthew Stafford, who threw for 209 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their leading rusher is Kyren Williams, who rushed for 76 yards. And their leading receiver is Tyler Higbee, who had 58 receiving yards. And for the Vikings, their leading passer was Sam Darnold, who threw for 245 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Their leading rusher was Aaron Jones, who rushed for 48 yards. And their leading receiver is TJ Hockenson, who had 64 receiving yards and a touchdown. So in this game, the story of this game was the Rams defense versus Sam Darnold. I don't know if it was just the pressure of a big game or what, but Sam Darnold completely collapsed in this game. He played horrible. And he played horrible last week too, and that does get me curious if that affects his contract. Because I was thinking that some team was probably going to give him a decent sized contract, and that was going to price the Vikings out of the market. And now I kind of have no idea what he's worth, or if the Vikings should even re-sign him. And even at the beginning of this game, Matthew Stafford played really well. The whole Rams team as a whole played amazing, and they really seem like they're going to be a formidable matchup in this playoffs. And it's going to be interesting how it goes. And it again, Sam Darnold, the two most important games of the year were last week against the Lions and this week against the Rams, and he buckled under pressure and played horrible. Like even his 1 touchdown pass, that was a horrible throw to T.J. Hockenson. T.J. Hockenson just made a great catch and made a great adjustment on it. So I am concerned for the Vikings, but on a positive, Aaron Jones is a good running back. Justin Jefferson is a good receiver. Jordan Addison's a good receiver. Their offensive line did play horrible, and I think overall their defense is fairly decent. So even with J.J. McCarthy in there, I think they can succeed. This is why I always said it since the beginning. I thought Sam Darnold and the Vikings would be good and a playoff team, just because the whole team's good enough that as long as Sam Darnold doesn't play horrible, they're a playoff team. And so it was interesting that it's going to end here. But the Rams also look really good. They did it for LA, and we'll see how this ends. So that's what happened in the wildcard weekend of the NFL season. If you like this type of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button like it owes you money, and I'll see you on the next one.